Okay, we will be on YouTube shortly. Okay, we are now live on Modern Gems Academy YouTube channel. I welcome all of you at the grand final debate of the Modern World Debates Competition 2022. In the grand finals, we have two teams. This is Kim Seok Jin on the proposition and Dubai College on the opposition. These two teams are going to face in the grand final debate for the championship title. They are going to be adjudicated by three invited international adjudicators: Riyad Belts from Maastricht University in Netherlands, Yaya from currently working in Doha, one of the most prominent international debate judges, judging at so many international debate tournaments in the last 2 years that probably none of other judges, and Shudipto Ahmed as a third judge. He's also one of the most established and accomplished judges, mostly judging university debate tournaments. So for sure, our debaters have a great panel who will decide who wins the debate between Kim Seok Jin on prop and Dubai College on op. One last thing before we start this debate, I want to share with you the topic for these finals. The topic says, this house prefers Asian values over Western individualism. That being said, I kindly invite the chair judge of this debate, Riyad Belts, to take over, and I wish everybody good luck. Congratulations for proceeding to finals, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and congratulations to both teams for making it this far. Just a couple of things before we start. I would like to ask both teams and all speakers to specify how they would like to take their POIs, their points of information. It would also be great if you can just introduce yourself briefly before your speech. If there are any questions, any comments before we start, now is the time to ask. If that's okay, we can just go ahead and get started. And I would like to invite the first speaker of proposition to begin this round.
Hi, I'm Chaewon. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and I would prefer verbal POIs, please. With that, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. When people are dying due to COVID, citizens on opposition refuse to listen to their governments and act in their own self-interest because wearing a mask is uncomfortable. We prefer individuals who care about the impact that their actions have on society. Proud to propose. I'll be doing 3 things in my speech. First, I'll frame the debate for proposition. Second, I'll talk about productivity. And third, I'll talk about individual welfare. 3 points of framing. First, Asian values, like the info site says, is the idea that you don't just prioritize yourself, but you're likely to respect what is going on in society as well. This means that not only are you more likely to respect the authorities on our side of the house, but the decisions that you make on a daily basis are made through the basis that it benefits not only you, but the general public as well. Countries that follow Asian values look like Singapore, South Korea, China, and Japan. Second, Western individualism means that you disproportionately care about yourself and your own life when you make decisions. By extension, you're more likely to be skeptical of authorities insofar as you externalize the harms that happen to you and internalize the good things that happen in your life. This looks like, for example, US citizens with COVID-19 and how they refused to wear masks because they were uncomfortable, even when it would have benefited individuals in society, or how people were skeptical of the COVID-19 vaccine even when authorities told them that it was safe. Third, our model in this debate is twofold. First, we prefer Asian values over Western individualism, which means that we prefer institutions and individuals who live by Asian values and support them more on our side of the house. Second, we still have some degree of caring about yourself and the individual on our side of the house. The distinction between both sides is that we have an equal balance of caring about yourself as an individual, but you also care equally as much about what is going on in society and what your impacts have on society as well. Under these parameters, we have 3 substantives for you. First, on how we have better productivity. Second, on how we have better individual welfare. And third, in Saidiya's speech, on how we have better social welfare. First substantive then on how we have better productivity on a national scale. The premise of this argument is that because those with Asian values are likely to not only prioritize themselves, but also societal needs, we are likely to push productivity so that the country can do things like progress faster, pass legislation more quickly, and overcome crisis better on our side of the house for three structural reasons. First, Asian values mean that you trust authorities more. This means that if what the government tells their citizens to do is reasonable to a degree, for example, quarantining during COVID, then citizens are likely to do so because they trust that the government does what is in their best interest. The impact of this is that change and development occur quicker insofar as citizens are doing things like following COVID-19 policies, insofar as they are taking necessary steps to pull a country out of being in a developing state. I'm going to preempt a point that opposition might bring up about how governments are likely to abuse power on our side of the house, insofar as citizens are giving them more trust. But we don't think that this point stands because governments, especially during a time when they need citizens to listen to them, have structural incentive to do good as citizens have voting power. So if what the government tells their citizens to do is something that is not good for the country, representatives get voted out of office. In fact, we think that abuse of power is more likely on their side of the house insofar as these politicians care more about themselves. For example, how much money they can earn as compared to the rest of society. The comparative on their side of the house is that citizens are skeptical of the government, no thank you, insofar as they value their thoughts more. So, during a time where productivity is necessary, citizens are unlikely to listen to government recommendations and policies to slow progress down. Second, you care more about society than you do about yourself. This means that if a government policy may be inconvenient to you in any way, you are likely to do it regardless because you know that it's for the greater good. This looks like, for example, using more sustainable items to combat climate change, or how, for example, in South Korea, it is illegal to have food waste, so every single citizen recycles their garbage. The impact of this is that caring about the greater good allows individuals to have a net benefit in society, even if they don't feel like it. However, the comparative on their side of the house is one where people just care about themselves, and maybe in their best case, their families and friends. But this is important because then citizens, even at the time, no, thank you. Even if they're a tiny bit inconvenienced by government policies, are likely to just ditch it and not follow it at all. This is extremely unproductive at the point at which governments need to create policies that cater to every single individual's life in order for there to be actual societal progress on their side of the house. Third, people on average are more benevolent when they follow Asian values, because at the point at which you're more likely to care about society than yourself, you're more likely to give that starving kid on their street your dinner and you don't think about your own. You're more likely to donate to charities in order to better social causes because you realize that your money can be used to help others. This means that even without government order, people are likely to do good. On the comparative, individuals on their side of the house do less things like donate because they see this as, oh, this is bad for me because I'm losing more money. Social causes are much better on our side of the house insofar as people take live active action like donating to ensure that change is created. Second substantive then, on the importance of discipline in individual well-being. The premise of this argument is that Asian values such as discipline are more beneficial to the individuals insofar as they promote long-term well-being over short-term pleasures. Now, first, what does discipline actually look like? It looks like, for example, saving money rather than indulging in overconsumption, not indulging in activities that produce short-term pleasure such as binge watching, drinking, drugs, and other stuff like that. It looks like being consistent with your actions, like donating a certain portion of your wealth each year. It's generally the belief that you must carefully calculate your actions because they create consequences for yourself and society. Why is this better on our side? We think that following Asian values like discipline throughout life from birth to end means that they are going to do actions that aren't necessarily pleasant in the short term, but have longer lasting benefits in the long term, like working harder in your youth so people have more successful careers, healthier lives that create long lasting happiness. But what is the issue with Western individualism that makes us prefer? What is the issue with Western individualistic values that actually make us prefer discipline? We think that individualism actually means that you're reliant on your own set of beliefs to guide you throughout your life because every person does what they think is good. Now, what this does is people do not believe that they have to think of the future because their actions don't have consequences. We've seen harms of this type of narrative pan out with, like, for example, boomers generations in 360s, where Western culture did things like, for example, embrace pastimes that made them feel extremely good, such as drug use and sex, and the yuppie generation in the 80s, which worshiped the instant but fleeting joy that that material possessions provided them with. Now, in their older age, many of these people face lasting problems from the short-term indulgence, such as chronic disease, lack of livelihood that they can support themselves in their with their old age and regret. So why do we think that long-term well-being is much more significant than any short-term unpleasantness that actually can be occurred from discipline, such as spending more time studying than playing as a child? We think that it increases life satisfaction and decreases fear of death because you are happier at the end of your life. And here I'm going to preempt a point that opposition might bring up. For example, they might say that these short-term harms are so big. For example, children actually go into depression or anxiety insofar as they're pushed more to study harder on our side of the house. We say that this is not true. This only happens in a world where people are concerned more about society over them themselves. Keep in mind that we have an actual balance of caring about the individual and caring about society. So we think that if the short-term harms get so bad that it's actually so bad for the individual that you eventually push it to long-lasting harms, individuals have a less incentive to do things like study harder insofar as it's actually impacting their mental health. We prefer this to the comparative, where many people who are overindulgent in their youth, who have opportunities to save money but choose not to do so, lack the savings to be able to take care of themselves in old age, and thus their children are left not only to take care of themselves or others. Therefore, lack of discipline in the individuals is also a net harm to others in society. I've proven to you why we are better for society in general and why we are better for individual welfare. We have social change faster on our side of the house insofar as individuals are not selfish and care only about themselves and their families, but rather society as a whole. So proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech and welcome the first speaker of opposition to begin whenever they're ready.
Yes, I'll start in about 60 seconds.
Yeah, you have a minute.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, my name is Parth and I would prefer POIs be asked verbally if possible. Thank you. I will begin in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, Asian values don't necessarily lead to better lives for individuals, and individuals are the most important stakeholder in this debate. In my speech, I will do a few things, starting off by recharacterizing and defining some of the things that team proposition looked at from a bigoted point of view. I will introduce the burdens that our side has, cover a team split, and finally reframe this debate because they forget and they miss, or team proposition doesn't actually analyze the main stakeholder in this debate, followed by introducing 2 arguments that'll be built upon by my second speaker. But before any of that, some rebuttals to the first speaker of team proposition, right? I want to start off by saying that, and this is a very precarious situation for team proposition, that the entirety of their first 2 arguments is based on the fact that things like discipline, social welfare, and all the other benefits like productivity that they talked about in their first argument don't exist in Western individualism. Now, I don't want to spend too long covering this because this appears in my second speaker's argument, but Western individualism encompasses qualities such as equality, independence, and efficiency, all things that actually build up to not directly, but indirectly leading to people being more disciplined, people actually having a greater incentive to benefit the wider population. Okay, her first argument, first mechanism for her first argument is better productivity, right? She gave us the example of the COVID-19 crisis and how people refused to wear masks because they believed, I guess, the government was tricking them. But that once again makes the sort of derogatory claim that those protests had absolutely no value, that those protests were completely unreasonable. And now, while in our modern world we might accept them as being unreasonable, those people were simply questioning, using their right to know the truth, using their right to be told the truth, to actually question what the government was saying. Yeah, sure, maybe the way they were doing it wasn't perfect, but you can't use that as an example to show how Western individualism in general promotes this sort of potentially nefarious activity. If we take you at your best case, you say Asian cultures, Asian values lead to people trusting authorities more. But we tell you that's inherently a bad thing. You try and counter my rebuttal to this by saying, our team proposition is going to bring up the idea that governments won't misuse this. I'm telling you why they will misuse this. And this comes on, and I'll explain this in my rebuttal to your second mechanism, that people or Asian values promote work for the greater good, right? So, moving forward again, you accept, Asian cultures essentially accept, as I just said, what governments say. They accept that if the government's asking them to stay at home in lockdown, it's for the greater good, right? You say that people don't explain or don't express their frustrations of, say, being in lockdown, whereas Western individualism does lead to that happening, right? But that's good. That's good. When you express your frustrations, that shows and that expresses to other people that you might not be happy. You say that it's a bad thing that governments need to cater to everyone. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Is it a bad thing that governments have to deal with everyone's frustrations? Because as a government, it's their responsibility to make sure everyone's happy, to make sure everyone's comfortable. How exactly does you voicing your frustration, how exactly is it voicing your frustration a bad thing? You're trying to tell people that you are uncomfortable. And as a society, as a member of society, I know I would be more than happy to understand. And I would really want to know if my fellow citizens are feeling frustrated. Right now, I'd like to move on to all the stuff I'd said I do. First of all, I'd like to recharacterize Asian values in terms of what we're going to use in our arguments, right? Two main things that I'm going to talk about that pertain to Asian values, right? One, the need for social cohesion, which leads to stronger class boundaries. And two, the idea of collectivism, a priority of community over self, and why that's potentially detrimental. Secondly, Western individualism is not about not caring about the community like team proposition mischaracterized. It's about autonomy. It's about independence and freedom and tolerance, as I'll talk about in my first argument. And it's about building quality relationships with people. So what are our burdens in this debate, right? Our burdens is that the most important stakeholder throughout the entirety of this debate is people, right? Reject it. I'll take you in a second. People lead happier lives with Western individualism. And that's what we'll prove to you by the end of this debate by giving you three fundamental arguments. I'll be talking about why tolerance is exclusive to our side of the house, why relationships are healthier and better on our side of the house. And thirdly, my second speaker, Viha, will cover how there exists more potential for social change in team opposition's world and how certain benefits that team proposition talks about actually also in Western individualism, right? Let me start with my first argument, why tolerism is exclusively present on the side of opposition. What is actually the importance of tolerance, right? Tolerance respects individuality and diversity in a diverse society. To be tolerant means that you accept other people's opinions and preferences, even when they live in a way that you don't agree with, right? This is important because it promotes peaceful living. If groups of people are intolerant of each other's individuality, there exists tension between those groups. They're unable to coexist peacefully. Second important to tolerance brings happiness. When you are tolerated, you're allowed to express yourself freely for who you are without hiding your personality, right? When you're not allowed to do so, you're essentially living your life according to the mandates of your social group, believing you're somehow wrong for being different. You cannot truly be happy if you're not tolerated. Second, why Asian values promote less tolerance? Asian values promote collectivism, right? Collectivism is the ideology and promotion of a group over self, as I talked about at the start, where ideals that are accepted by the group are considered more salient than those expressed by few, right? This automatically creates a subconscious desire in the minds of of anyone else and in the individual, that right out the gate reduces your individuality because you're not willing to break that collectivism. Secondly, preference for social cohesion. People are not allowed to express themselves freely. This limits their freedom. I'll take you now.
Abuse of power by governments isn't likely on our side of the house insofar as politicians and representatives have a concern for societal good at large
I've
and because
dealt with
it is
this
a
at the
fundamental
start of
part
my
of Asian
speech.
values.
Right now I'm going through if you have any questions to do with my argument, you could have asked it. I dealt with that at the start of my speech, right? Unrealistic social cohesion, as I've just explained, these individuals place the ideals of their social groups over the ideals of self, right? People don't want to be the first to break the social cohesion. In an effort to conform these unrealistic social cohesion standards, they choose not to express themselves. And once again, this is because they fear they cannot be tolerated. Coming back, in fact, to what first speaker said, they won't express their frustration because they feel like it's going to make them somehow outsiders. Somehow they're going to break social cohesion. That's a bad thing, as I explained. How does Western individualism promote more tolerance, right? Western individualism, as the name suggests, promotes individualism and independence. It emblemizes equality, protected time, instead of hierarchy, which is quite clearly both teaches the individuals and their society that everyone is equal, everyone's viewpoints are equal. This actually is quite, for example, people belonging to the LGBTQ plus community, they would feel much more safe expressing themselves in a Western community where they know they're going to be treated as equals in comparison to a community that supports Asian values in which they are more likely to be shunned or sort of concerned or labeled as people who break the social order. What are the impacts of this? Happiness is benefited when you're allowed to express yourself, as I had explained. And this is the fact that Western individualism promotes that Asian values do not promote. In general, the most important stakeholder in this debate is benefited by Western individualism, which is why, ladies and gentlemen, I beg you to oppose.
All right, thank you very much for that fine speech. Just a small reminder that the first and the last minute is protected time, so you're not able to ask POIs. And just another reminder to everyone observing to stay muted during the speeches. The next speaker, you may begin whenever you're ready.
I do want it noted that the voice, when he said out of order, that wasn't any of us. It was like someone unmuted.
All right, thank you for letting me know.
Hi, I will be the second proposition speaker. Okay, just let me get my notes and timer set. Am I visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Sorry. I'll begin my speech. In 3, 2, 1. So side opposition comes up and tells us that they're going to respond to all of our points, but let me just first call out the fact that they left our entire second substantive completely untouched. Their only response to this is that, our case doesn't exist in Western individualism, which is the strangest response I've heard, and it engages with absolutely nothing that we have given you in this debate thus far. And then I'm just gonna go through their responses to our first substantive, because they also ignore another point that we give you on abuse of power, and they continued on after that. So let me just rebuild our case for you right at this moment. In my first speaker's speech, they told you that on our side of the house, we have greater productivity on a national level. The only thing opposition had to say to that is that, they're going to follow these rules without thinking, and they're not going to question the truth, and that's a bad thing. So first of all, I think that they're strawmanning the case, because it is not so much that they don't question the truth, but rather there is no some sort of when there is disturbance, they're not willing to if they're more, even if they are frustrated, they're willing to listen to what the government has to say before allowing their frustrations to get the better of their decisions. This looks like in Singapore, when in order to enact more, in order to keep track of social distancing and the COVID pandemic spread, the government had us all use tokens, which yes, they track our location, and people were distrustful of that because they don't want to give that information to the government. But then the government demonstrated that it is beneficial, and it is not they're not stalking these individuals, but rather ensuring that if there is a case that in a public space, then everyone who had those tokens can be pinged and reached to make sure that they quarantine so that they don't continue to spread the virus, right? So they strawman our case when they make it seem like everyone on our side of the house is completely silent, and they refuse to, they didn't respond to the fact that mobility on our side is much greater, which I'll take as a concession on their side of the house. So in our second substantive, we told you that individuals tend to be better. So I guess this comes in direct clash with their first substantive, but let it be noted that they responded to nothing we gave. Right? We told you that on our side of the house, we have this better sort of discipline. When you're considering long-term well-being over short-term benefits, then you're ultimately going to, the life you lead, maybe in some points, especially in like childhood, when you have to put something like study over something that is fun, it might not be as great, but in the long term, you end up having a more happier life or a more fruitful life, right? And we also told you that if the short-term harms are that bad and that they extend to long-term harms, because of the balance between society and in person, those are more likely to change. We got no response in these whatsoever. Please respond and opt to. But now I'm going to move into what they just rebuttals into what they told us. So the first thing they sort of the only thing they sort of say for Western individualism and their recharacterization is that it promotes autonomy and quality relationships, which none of those things. Well, and so. Let it be known that even in a world that has Asian values, you are your own person, in the sense that while you put society over you, I think it's a very unhealthy. It's just a really strawman characterization of what living with Asian values is actually like. Because chances are most of us have Asian values, but we're and have grown up under Asian values, but we also learn to balance like wanting to respect our elders with respecting ourselves, and that and there comes the balance, right? But to respond to their first substantive and their only substantive so far, which is on why tolerance is somehow exclusive. So I guess this comes down to two things. First, I think that the points that they make on how at a social level, like the social cohesion is not as big of a problem as they sort of make it out to be, right? Because if in a realistic world, to the sort of Asian, like they haven't proven why like a dislike or a certain difference is so detrimental to society as a whole that in an Asian value in an Asian society, it's gonna be something like it's gonna be like that detrimental to the stability of that, right? Well, basically what I'm trying to say is they haven't really impacted why in the world that we propose, it's so detrimental to be different in those ways. And to the point at which, like, if I have to concede that to a degree, we might have to sacrifice that, I think the practical outcomes of what our side proposes is much better for society and individuals as a whole. And why I think that is because we tell you that, and I'll get into it in my third sub as well on social change, but generally, if you believe in the bettering of the society as a whole, then you're just less likely to be malevolent to other people, right? The world that they paint is unrealistic in the sense that the sort of backlash or the that they try to paint in quality relationships really won't exist or won't exist to the same degree when you believe in trying to make people like life around you as good or life around you better. Like my first speaker told you that people are generally benevolent when they're thinking of other people. And so in that, sure, I'll take a POI.
Are curtailing freedoms, which are an important democratic right, worth blind obedience and discipline?
Pardon?
Are curtailing freedoms, which are democratic rights, worth blind obedience and discipline?
The thing is, it's not blind obedience, right? We believe that people can think for themselves. It's just a matter of like prioritizing which concerns you're gonna it's prioritizing like what concerns you're going to express and who that hurts more and whether you actually and like who benefits from it more, because if more people benefit from it, then you're going to enact change on it. I'm going to get in that actually more in my third sub. So what I want to talk about is why we as a whole have a better like social change. And the premise of this argument is that on side proposition, as a result of placing society's welfare or like the welfare of the whole above the individual, as a whole we see better social change because of this collectivism and increased care for society. So the first step of this is identifying that there is a problem. This is where there's ideal of like blind following kind of falls, because when you're considering the entire society and like what its needs are, then it's easier to recognize when its needs are not being met, right? And under collectivism, note that this also includes minorities too. No one goes about improving a country and then leaving one group in the dust. And so when you consider a country holistically, there is it's easier to spot issues and it's easier to therefore enact change. No, thank you. This is less likely to occur on side opposition, because what happens on their side when you increase this, when you encourage like the frustration that they so want to claim, what happens is that everyone like clashes. Everyone has a problem of their own that is like catered to themselves. Therefore, you've got more discussion over like which problem is to be prioritized rather than how to enact better change on these issues, right? And so yes, while we might say that, we have to take problems at a larger sense, we say that when you improve society as a whole, you're also more likely to improve the life of an individual. So even if we might have to silence those couple individuals that have their own issues, like it is on our side, we have success. In bettering society as a whole through the consideration, through collectivism, and through thinking of society holistically, we actually still end up improving more lives on our side of the house. And because of the mechanisms that my first speaker gave you on productivity, on our side of the house, this happens faster. Social change happens at a greater rate. And because people also trust their government, are less likely to be hella skeptical about it, it's also likely to be genuine. And that means it lasts longer, which is something that side opposition cannot claim. And because on our side of the house, we promote like thinking of other people, like putting that before yourself, we actually end up with a more benevolent society, which therefore benefits our side of the house. So because of that, I'm so proud to propose.
All right, thank you very much for that fine speech. I would now like to welcome the second speaker of opposition to continue whenever they're ready.
Okay, I'm gonna start. Panel, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the baker, or the brewer that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. I'm so proud to oppose this debate. And let me take down their entire arguments and responses to our main substantives. We told you in our first speech that it's okay to be different. And their entire response to our arguments about freedom, about building relationships, was a wash. Okay? They told us we were straw manning. They told us that we didn't have any adequate analysis. But we're telling you, panel, we had no response to our principle of freedom. We even asked them to engage with our principle in a POI. We asked them, are curtailing freedoms worth blind obedience and discipline? Their response was a wash when their first speaker literally said, we prefer Asian values because they don't question the government. That is blind obedience. That is blind discipline. This is a principal impact that they refuse to engage in. So after this speech, our principle still stands. It's protected time. Now, secondly, their main arguments on first and second was about trusting authorities. They're about Asian values, making sure you trust authorities. Their second speaker literally had the audacity to come up and say, we are fine with silencing individuals. Panel, I see multiple violations of human rights in this very statement, in this very argument. This means on their side, that there be no political discourse and debate that ensures these policies are rightly questioned. So there's no effective policies being created, because at the very heart of a healthy democracy is discussion, is debate, is not following certain policies without any questioning. And we say that it is important to prioritize the creation of effective long-term policies because of this reason. And then they talked about following laws in a crisis. Panel, I don't know if they're living in a vacuum or not, but there is something called a law. There's something called legislation. There's a presence of consequences if you don't adhere to laws. That's why people get jailed if they don't follow a government's orders. this means that on our side, we still have an active incentive for individuals to listen to authorities on our side of the house, because it's actually pertaining to their own self-interest, to their own individualism, to not get jailed, to not break the law and get in trouble for it. And then finally, their opening statement was about talking about the negative impacts of self-interest, but they gave us no mechanism as to why social welfare is exclusive to their side of the house. They talked about how our side cares more about ourselves than society. This is actually my entire substantive, but I'll just give you two main responses to this. Firstly, we would say that individualism actually helps society because you are focusing on developing yourself, which means you're more likely to be able to develop the skills, the talents in order to create effective change and use it to help people. But secondly, we would also say that having a strong self-interest and having individualism is a core component of those who are most concerned about others' welfare. And I'll tell you why right now, okay? I'll use the same analogy that we found in first speech. They talked about benevolence and seeing a starving kid on the street. They said that we would do less things on our side, like donate, to ensure change is created. But let me explain something to you, panel. Self-interest, individualism has many dimensions. It doesn't mean just, I'm going to protect my money, ensure that I have enough money. It means things like a sense of contentment, happiness, and actually putting people before you, because that is something that brings a lot of humans happiness. On our side of the house, we think that humans are not fundamentally bad people, and they have a moral conscience, which means that they actually do choose to help that starving kid because it is in their own self-interest, because it helps them feel happy, helps them feel contentment. But on the comparative, our donations are authentic, not preconditioned by Asian values, and that is where our side wins. Now, I'm going to show you how we get all the social change that we heard in second prop about collectivism and cohesion on our side of the house through individualism. Before I do that, I'll take a POI.
Then, if thinking of others makes you happy, then isn't that effectively like symmetric on our side of the house? Isn't it a bit unfair to then say that everyone in our side of the world is like depressed?
I know we need to understand the comparative in this side of the house, okay? Western individualism has been an enormous success in encouraging ordinary people to realize their potential and their inner depths. Individualism and personalization are moral and social processes. We cannot say that the benefits are symmetric on their side of the house because of a few key reasons, which I'll get onto in my argument. And we'll tell you that how we get better outcomes on our side. This is because of two key reasons. First of all, true individuals use their talent in a cause in which they believe in. Our side believes that we develop ourselves for a higher cause because that is the route to happiness and meaning. That is the route to being human, right? So we need to understand that by developing ourselves, we become useful to others. That can only happen through individualism. It cannot happen through Asian values, okay? So our side uses a much more powerful motivator to help people, self-interest, as opposed to the Asian values of being obedient and disciplined. Compare that to the incentive on the other side of the house. Asian values where you prioritize others over yourself. The fundamental nature of humanity is that people are naturally more interested in their own happiness than that of others. And it is impossible in their literal heart that they ever prefer someone else's prosperity over their own. Instead, on our side, this is where the difference comes between both sides of the house. We got organic and authentic altruism. Why? Because Asian values are often as a result of conditioning, of imposing certain ideals on children from a young age, certain expectations. So that means it's artificial. It's not coming from someone's own desire to be good, their own desire to help people. But on our side, individualism means that they choose to help others to help themselves. And we crucially get this self-exploration of people to find out what they want to do in life and use that to help people because they truly want to. This is where how the second speaker talked about long-termism, we get long-termism because our change is organic, not artificial. So through individualism, people want to help and use their brain and time rather than being conditioned to do something. This is so important because it means there's less likely to be rebellions and backlash against these Asian values on our side of the house, and we actually get the same benefits of that through a more authentic means. And then we need to understand also crucially that humans are most sympathetic towards those who are closely tied to their own safety and happiness, right? There needs to be this freedom to express yourself, something that we constantly stress in first speech, because over time, we're not going to keep sticking to one philosophy, one ideology from like the 20th century. That means society won't evolve, won't progress. That is the beauty of Western individualism, conflicting viewpoints, different discussions, people allowed to be who they want to be and express their opinions wherever they want, right? That is a baseline prerequisite of social change on our side of the house. This mechanism is exclusive to our side of the house, which is why society evolves in a much better way. But we need to understand this is a very powerful link between sympathy and caring for others and self-interest. When society consists of family, friends, and acquaintances, the gap between helping others and self-interest is very, very small. This is precisely because our self-interest is bound up in the happiness of those we care about, and their happiness becomes part of what we pursue in our desire to better our own condition. Let me give you two examples. Firstly, let's look at this from a localized point of view. That is when we care about our family, friends, children, loved ones. But then we can, this kind of caring extends to the wider world, because the whole basis of self-interest, of individualism, is that you better your own condition by helping people you care about. And this can be people in causes that may be distant to you, like poverty and inequality. That's why we crucially get all the benefits of Asian values on our side of the house in a much more long-termist and authentic manner. And we believe that having a healthy self-interest and individualism doesn't preclude caring about others, which is why I'm so proud to oppose.
All right, thank you very much for that fine speech. I would like to welcome the third speaker of proposition to continue whenever they're ready.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Great. Give me a second. Okay. Sorry. All right. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Side opposition fundamentally loses this debate at the point at which they try and make an argument just off the basis of the concept of freedom and democracy alone. They ran this entire debate running a parallel case to ours. We think they had very little engagement. We think we told you a bunch of reasons why we win today. And as a result, I'm so proud to propose. Before I get into what I'm going to talk about in my speech today, I want to make something really clear. And really, it's this characterization on what a loss of freedom and democracy looks like. It's evident that side opposition is quite brainwashed because they believe that just losing freedom and democracy in and of itself is a harm. They tell you that this is an impact in and of itself, but we tell you that the impacts are twofold, and I'm going to engage with this later on. Firstly, authorities are less likely to listen to people. We concede to this, and this means that, what's going to happen is that, let's say and some individual has a problem, the authority might overlook that for the good of like trying to improve his society as a whole, or like whatever other goals the authority has. Secondly, we think that people are less likely to voice opinions. We concede to this as well. On our side of the house, it's likely that because of a dependency on trusting the government, people are less likely to voice opinions. Now, this is what the loss of freedom and democracy looks like. I'm very glad that we can stop talking in like broad terms and we can talk about actual impacts. Then I'm going to be talking about two things in my speech today. Firstly, on society, well, I'll prove to you 3 reasons why we take society. And secondly, on the individual basis, which I think is the main clash which they talked about, but really most of their material came under society as well. Okay, onto society. Firstly, I'm going to talk about government productivity. They say that authorities can hinder progress because of abuse of power. However, I think this is quite symmetric on our side to when authorities are able to guarantee more progress at the point at which authorities are able to be more productive. Their rebuttal here was that, oh, governments still listen to authorities, or like people still listen to authorities because there are laws. But we think that this is almost this can be symmetric on our side of the house when you see that there's still when you see that on our side of the house you've still got democracies where people can vote even if you have Asian values, right? I think that government productivity is generally a wash, except for the fact that on our side of the house, I think government productivity is generally a wash. And then on social change and activism, they tell you that most people do not point out like what is wrong because they're too trusting of the government, right? This is another impact of that freedom thing that I told you about earlier. However, we told you that what happens in our side of the house is people are more aware of society, and as a result, they're likely to try and make change in the society in and of itself, right? This exists both in the government and on the individual basis. I think that this point also washes because neither side provide like significant marginal analysis for why one is more likely than the other, right? I think that social change versus activism, I think that in both the clashes so far, if the actors are benevolent and good, you're likely to get better outcomes on our side of the house. Whereas if the actors are malevolent or antagonistic, you're likely to get better outcomes on their side of the house because you push back against that. Therefore, those two clashes are up till now a wash. Then I think now I'm going to prove to you why on our side of the house, we win both of these 2 points because we get more benevolent actors. Let me quote second op. She tells us humans are not fundamentally bad people. We agree. On net, you are likely to have more benevolent actors than antagonistic actors because the vast majority of people are born benevolent and with good intentions. No one is born with an intent to harm, right? What we think, and as we agree with them critically here, I'm using their analysis here, humans are not fundamentally bad people. This means that in the vast majority of cases, you're not likely to see the antagonistic and harmful things you see on their side of the house because the vast majority of actors, or at least marginally more actors, are benevolent on our side of the house. What you see is that for social change and activism, you're likely to have more benevolent actors creating change. And for government productivity, you're likely to have more benevolent authorities that allow society to progress. So based on their analysis, I think we take those 2 clashes on social change and activism and government productivity. Even if you think that's a wash, 2 deadlock breakers. Firstly, on the thing that they talked about quite a bit, which is about how society wants people to improve. We pushed this to you in our first speaker speech, and their response here was that individuals also want to benefit others because they're self-conditioned to sort of have this benefit themselves. Firstly, we think that sometimes there's a conflict of interest. You can't always benefit yourself and benefit others, even if you want to all the time. For example, sometimes you just can't afford to give that thing to the starving person on the street. And as a result, we don't think that this is mechanized well enough on their side of the house because we also gave you a mechanism of how people prioritize short-term harms on their side of the house. Furthermore, if you don't believe that, we say that this is a wash anyway, because on our side of the house, the motion explicitly says we prioritize a balance between individual and societal needs. They say we only care about the size of society. The info slide disproves them. Therefore, I think on net, while they say that individuals want to benefit others, that same altruism is present on our side of the house. The difference then, the margin, is that on our side of the house, there's this added incentive that people want society to improve more. The second deadlock breaker then is on relationships. They didn't give a point here, but we told you that on an individual and societal basis, you're likely to have relationships that are more trusting and where you build stronger bonds. Therefore, you're likely to get better relationships with other people. Therefore, we think we're better for society as a whole. So there I've proven to you 3 reasons on the way up between benevolent and antagonistic stakeholders, on the deadlock breaker of government productivity, and on the deadlock breaker of relationships, why we take that first clash on society. Even if you think that was a wash, I'm not going to prove to you why we benefit on the individual basis. Their point here is that they have increased tolerance, and as a result, and for a bunch of different reasons, this makes it so that on their side, they get more unique social identities, and you respect individuality and diversity. I'll take you in a second. However, what happens when people aren't tolerant to others, right? Let's say there's conflicting interests in society. I don't want something to happen, but someone else wants something to happen. Who's more tolerant in this situation? We think those benefits are washed when in a large majority of cases, people have conflicting interests and these interests do not agree. As a result, we think that this benefit on their side of the house is massively mitigated, and I'm going to tell you why on our side of the house, this is better. I'll take your POI.
How does don't you believe that through Asian values you help others to help yourself, not because of authentic desire to help others?
It doesn't matter because we help others and you're still likely to feel happy. Even if you help others because you believe that you're doing society a good, you still feel like you're doing society a good. I don't think that the fact that, oh, it's not altruistic or it doesn't come straight from the heart is like a big enough point to win you the clash. But I've also proven to you why we're likely to get altruism on our side as well. Back to individual happiness. I've told you why their benefits on tolerance and like social and like individually and diversity are massively mitigated because of clashes in people's interests. Then why do we get greater individual happiness? This is because we have greater discipline on our side of the house. We're able to pave a better future and plan for the future because you're more disciplined in doing the work that you have. We think that sometimes this tolerance backfires because you might not be tolerant to certain things, which might help you improve in the long run. At the point at which you have this discipline on our side of the house, you're likely to see benefits in the long run. And the way up here, even if you believe that so far the two things are symmetric, is that this discipline that plans for a better future is much more long-termist than very short-term, like things such as stress or short-term things such as unhappiness in the short term. We think that not only are we significantly better for society for all the three reasons I gave you, but we're better for individual happiness because most of their benefits wash, and we ensure that people plan for the long term when they're more disciplined. So proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much for that fine speech. And now I would like to welcome the third speaker of opposition to continue whenever they're ready.
Cool. Can everybody see and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm just gonna set my timer really quickly. Okay, let's start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, it seems that side proposition's case and the entirety of all their arguments rests on severe mischaracterization of this motion. We cannot allow proposition to believe that people are inherently bad. We cannot allow them to win this debate. But panel, look, we asked a very, very simple question in this debate. When you live a life governed by a fixed ideology that was literally brought up and encoded over 3.5 decades ago and originated over thousands and thousands of years ago by Confucius, you live a restricted life. You live an unhappy life. And why do we prefer to have Asian values in general? We tell you that the net benefit the net benefit of Asian values is negative. That is why we win this debate. Two main themes in this debate: one, tolerance and liberty. Number two, on which side of the house do we generally get better social change, right? But panel, listen, I'm going to just talk about the first theme, right? Does tolerance actually correlate with happiness, right? And we told you very clearly that yes, tolerance does correlate with happiness. What was our main claim here? We told you that it's very important to express yourself, given that freedom is present on our side of the house, right? And we told you that this freedom of expression was fundamentally an advantage because of the fact that with freedom, it just makes it much easier for you to be yourself, right? We told you that self-interest, because of the fact that individualism has inherent incentives that are moral processes as well. We told you that self-interest is more ripe on our side of the house, and it was this authenticity that was literally the side of proposition had to engage with. We tell you that authenticity goes to our side of the house. But why exactly is it so important for incentives to be inherently? Why is it so important for authenticity to take place, right? Under this, what we told you on our side of the house was that authenticity was important because of the fact that, look, on our side, in the very least, even though on their side, in the very least, if you're not authentic, then you compromise so much on long-termism, right? We told you that most of the impacts of long-termism are again symmetric in this debate, as we told you, right? But the fact of the matter is that we can achieve long-termism on our side of the house because of the fact that we not only have more tolerance on our side of the house, but because of the fact that conflicting opinions on our side of the house is fundamental to ensuring that society can come to a certain consensus, even if society does not come to a certain consensus in the long term. We tell you that conflicting opinions is something that was fundamental and did not, and side proposition did not exactly engage with. No, thank you. Panel. More crucially then, on this entire scheme about tolerance and liberty, we tell you that productivity is more achieved on side opposition, right? Because look, side proposition comes up with this whole claim on why Asian values and people have about Asian values, for instance, and why exactly people need to, why exactly people have an inherent desire to adhere to society, and basically their entire claim about collectivism comes into play. We tell you, panel, that people have an obligation and duty to listen to their governments, right? That's something that's present on both sides of the house. No, thank you. Right, but we told you very clearly that legislation is also present on our side of the house. To a major extent, it is both symmetric. In the very least, on our side of the house, society does have metrics to ensure that the people are not actually breaking laws. Like, for instance, cancel culture, call-out culture is present, and it's so prominent in the status quo. Right, we needed a lot of analysis that explained why it was not inherently symmetric. Right, but look at their language. They say that people have an obligation to adhere to laws in government. That is true of a democracy as well. You elect a government to govern you, right? This is mandate principle that is present if you elect a government. This is something side proposition haven't exactly looked at. But listen, nowhere do we actually get any analysis as to why it is actually worth curtailing freedom. Why exactly freedom is worth curtailing on side proposition, right? We told you two main things. One, no, thank you. Freedom is something that empowers people, for example. Actually, I'll take you in a second, right? We also told you that people who are born into Asian values not get to have a say on which values they prefer. This was a clear this was a clear violation of the intergenerational principle. I'll take it POI.
When a Mexican immigrant moves to America to get a better life, an American man is upset because he may lose his job. We take a stance on this while you just encourage conflict. Please engage.
Listen, we don't exactly encourage conflict altogether. What we are saying is it is far better on our side of the house because of the fact that there's a lot more liberty, because of the fact there is a lot more freedom. Freedom is something that you guys haven't exactly taken into consideration. We still need responses as to why it is worth curtailing freedom. Listen, panel, on the second theme, on which side do we get better social change? We told you so many reasons as to why social change is so prominent on our side of the house. Why? Because listen, side proposition has literally debated this entire theme with the notion that COVID-19 is one of the only examples that are there. We gave you numerous examples apart from COVID-19. There was no response to the point that this wasn't exactly so exclusive in this debate. Crucially, panel, we told you that authentic desires to help people were something that was so crucial and it was something that is so exclusive in this debate, right? Why was it so important to have authentic desires? We told you that most impacts of long-termism again are symmetric, right? But listen, panel, we tell you we again can achieve a lot of long-termism on our side of the house, as our second speaker very clearly notified, right? But listen, panel, at the very least on their side of the house, they've said that, look, social change occurs better on their side of the house because discipline is present, right? Listen, panel, we tell you that individualism functions on self-interest, right? It's not like people don't have an interest to actually look into society, to actually believe that society is something that is important to them. People have a huge incentive on our side of the house because of the fact that they care for people that matter to them the most. And that actually lined up with our primary burden, which was literally about happiness on our side of the house, which is exactly why, panel, we tell you that we have the upper hand here, right? But then look, panel, they come up with authority, right, about this power of abuse thing. They say that this was a claim we met. We said, listen, panel, we do not actually think that this claim was something that we brought up so inherently and so importantly from our first speech. We tell you very clearly that we much rather prefer a world wherein people can actually think properly rather than just blindly following Asian values, rather than blindly following something that was set up nearly 35 years ago, right? But listen, we tell you that there are two primary deadlock breakers in this debate. One, freedom, right? We told you in fact it out in our second speech why exactly it is bad to violate LGBTQ plus rights as well, right? We don't want to violate freedom rights. LGBTQ plus rights is something that is possibly being violated, is being violated on the side of opposition, proposition, given the fact that there's an inherent obligation to follow these certain fixed Asian values, right? But crucially, panel, we told you time and time again that authenticity and social change was something that was so important. Their response in the POI was that it doesn't matter. Yes, it does matter, because authenticity directly correlates with long-termism. That is something we tell you that is exclusive on our side of the House panel. We needed more engagement from side proposition. With all that in mind, I strongly believe the motion is in our favor. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that fine speech. We are now moving to reply speeches, starting with the opposition reply speech. Both reply speeches have 90 seconds before we begin, and there is no extra time between the two speeches. Opposition speaker may begin whenever they're ready.
Okay, I'm just going to start now.
All right.
Panel, progress in thought is the assertion of individualism against authority. This is the crux of their entire case. Their approach is to silence individuals, to stop political questioning, and to embody Asian values blindly without any contention. Our approach is to create authentic altruism, effective outcomes, and to develop yourself to help others. This is only possible through individualism, which is why we win this debate. They take and stick with the idea that Western individualism is simply one idea, selfishness. They tell us that our characterization is shallow, but every argument that Team Proposition makes against our constructives is based on this one word, and they completely ignore any other aspect of Western individualism, which is the first of many reasons why they have lost this debate. They have transformed this debate into a debate on freedom and democracy, because that is what they introduced. And they debated time and time again, but consistently forgot the main stakeholder in this debate, the individual and the society, on top of which they simply skip over our arguments on tolerance. So we take that as a concession on our side of the House. But let's actually address the most important clash in this debate, social change. This affects the majority of people in both sides of the House. We gave you 3 responses why our side is comparatively better than Asian values. Number 1, through individualism, people develop themselves. By developing ourselves, we become useful to others. If you continually focus on society and blindly following, obedience and discipline and respecting authorities and not questioning and developing yourself, you aren't likely to be as much of help to people who need it. You won't have those benefits on your side of the House. But secondly, we need them to engage with the fact that there are multiple dimensions to individualism and self-interest. Self-interest also means a sense of contentment, a sense of happiness, and actually putting people over you if that brings you happiness. So we think, as we said, and your third speaker agreed with, humans aren't fundamentally bad, and individualism means that they can actually choose to help people. They can actually choose to help that starving kid, not because they have to follow an Asian value ideology, but because they want to. And thirdly, on authenticity, which they called irrelevant, we tell you that obedience and silencing people and listening to authorities means that these individuals don't learn to question. Our side tells us that individualism actually creates people who genuinely want to help people, not because they're socially conditioned, but because they care about them. They want to pursue their self-interest. And authenticity is so crucial in this debate because you compromise on long-termism on their side of the House. We get that because we get tolerance and conflicting opinions, which are fundamental to ensuring society comes to an informed consensus. And it is such a powerful driver and motivator for people to go above and beyond to help others. It's about this passion for helping others. Now we need to understand that we had this whole clash on productivity. We tell you that productivity is achieved on side opposition. Collectivism also happens on our side, and the obligation to help others is present on both sides of the House. But we have many mechanisms to hold people accountable, such as legislation, such as cancel culture, which means their entire case on, crises falls without any kind of engagement. And we ask you a very simple question: why is it worth curtailing such an important democratic right, that is freedom, such an important principal reason on their side of the house, in order to obtain, people who blindly follow authorities? And then they start off in their response to this by saying that individuals still care about themselves in first speaker, but then their second argument is about that Asian values promote obedience, and they want it to promote obedience for social harmony. Which of them is it? It's a very clear contradiction on their side of the house, and the only response that we've received in our first argument. We tell you, in our world, we hold the individual to the highest regard. We say that all the benefits that they talk about fall on our side of the house, because individualism means you can still care about others while caring for yourself, which is why I'm so proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech. And as the last speaker of the House, I invite the proposition reply speaker.
I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opposition hinged the bulk of their case on the ideal of preserving freedom. If I prove to you that we take this down, we win. We told you that we win on freedom if authorities are on net benevolent. This is structurally because if freedom is taken away, they will make good decisions on net benefit the people, whereas this freedom is likely to result in slow bureaucracy and tensions on their side. Besides the fact that second op essentially claimed that individuals are benevolent, like verbatim, we gave you reasoning as to why people are generally born benevolent and will grow up benevolent. However, if you don't believe this, number one, freedom is a wash, and number two, this takes down their second main push of altruism and long-termism. To be honest, this takes down their second main push on altruism and long-termism. So insofar as they've hinged their entire case on this, we preserve freedom, then we basically win, because I've already proven to you why we take this down. But for the sake of engagement, I'm going to go over the other material that they tell you. First, on who has better societal change, and second, on who has better national productivity. First, on societal change, we told you 3 things. That number one, people have an incentive to do good insofar as they care more about society. Number two, if people care more about society, then they're likely to catch flaws. And number 3, if you care, that you care more about people, if they care, that you care more about people that doesn't give actual direct benefits to you, which are the most vulnerable people on our side of the house. So the opposition has, by the way, been running a completely parallel case for this social change clash. And since they didn't engage with their mechs at all, but we already win, But since I'm charitable, I'll engage in their case. Second op tells you that people feel happy by helping others, so you're likely to help on their side of the house. And we say, okay, this is true, but on a very small scale. That is to say, you only feel happy when you see the result right in front of you, because you feel more connected. For example, when you give a starving kid an apple and you see that kid's face light up, then you feel happy, but you significantly feel less happy if you donate $10 to a charity thousands of miles away, because you don't see your actions translate into good. But recognize that these issues often are the ones that need the most help. The issues that are thousands of miles away in developing countries, where children are stick thin and where women are raped. Then it stands that on opposition, you are much less likely to donate to these causes because they feel less happy, but people on our side of the house do, because they know that no matter how far this cause is, it's good for society. Then they tell you that even if we have people helping others, it doesn't come from the heart. And they tell you that they have altruistic help. 2 things. Firstly, they never tell you why this is a principle you need to abide by, why altruism is a principle regardless of the practical implications. So then this principle of altruism folds into the practical. The second response is that we say it doesn't really matter if people are altruistic, because then we have the same practical outcomes. And long-term, you will still follow Asian values as well. So this kind of just totally disappears from their side. But they have more arguments on tolerance. What did they tell you? They told you that people get more tolerant on their side, and people realize that it's okay to be different and people accept differences. The way we took this point down was Saidi explained to you why the concurrent value of balancing individual and societal needs prevents collectivism from achieving extremes, insofar as people are less likely to criticize people who are different due to the fact that they recognize that they could hurt the other person. Asian values are benevolent. Now, second clash on who has better national productivity, we said two things: that people have more trust in the government, so they're likely to follow policies. But second, we're likely to prioritize society, right? So what did they tell you? They basically told you one thing, which was freedom to this like entire substantive that we built up, and they didn't engage with any of our mechanisms. I already told you how we took down freedom in the beginning of my speech. But okay, even if you don't buy a rebuttal to freedom, that they have one more argument, right? That people need to follow laws for national progress and are unlikely to break laws insofar as they need to face legal consequences. We say two things. We say, number one, people still resist and break these laws. For example, in the US, citizens refused to wear masks and go into Walmart, even though it was a rule in Walmart that you needed to like wear a mask to go in, right? So this leads to conflict, which is even worse on our side. But second, we say not all problems are fixed by laws, because long-term causes, which governments have no incentive to cater towards, insofar as voting cycles are short, can only be fixed with things like PSAs and recommendations like recycling. It's not likely to be fixed on their side of the house because it's not a law and people care more about their own lives. And it's likely to be fixed on ours because we're better for society and people know that narrative. We have better change. We're better for productivity. We're better for individuals. We win this debate.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech, and thank you both teams for this round. Now the judges will move to the deliberation room.